Good evening to all of you. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for the day, who is going to talk to us on the topic Rebuilding India's economy post Covid-19. For this policy talk series, there could not have been appropriate person than him to enlighten, to enhance, and to guide all of us. I am absolutely delighted to present pioneer of developmental economics, our speaker for today, who is not only a renowned economist, but also the first vice chairman of Government of India Policy Think Tank, Niti Aayog. Let us welcome Mr. Arvind Panagariya, sir, for his precious time. Thank you, sir, for your presence. Before we proceed further, let me share his academic and professional journey. His academic excellence started from Rajasthan University, and he did his PhD from Princeton University on international economics and developmental economics. He started his professional career as a lecturer in Rajasthan University and later on taught economics at University of Maryland. He worked at International Monetary Fund, World Bank, World Trade Organization, and United Nations Conference on Trade and Development in various capacities, and later on joined Asian Development Bank as chief economist. Currently, sir is Professor of Economics and Jagdish Bhagwati Professor of Indian Political Economy, School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University, USA. Sir has written more than 18 books, including the famous book, India, the Emerging Giant, published in 2008, which was listed as the top pick by the Economist magazine. Sir has been advisor to the board of US-India Strategic Partnership Forum, non-resident senior fellow, Brooklyn Institution, Washington, DC, to name a few. He was the member of many public policy activities, principally focusing on India, International Advisory Board, Securities and Exchange Board of India, Independent Task Force on South Asia and India. He is founding editor of India Policy Forum. For his contribution to the field of economics and policy making, he was awarded Padma Bhushan, third highest civilian honor in 2012 by Government of India. He was appointed India's Sherpa for G20 talks in September 2015. He negotiated G20 communique for G20 summits on behalf of India under presidencies of Turkey, China, and Germany. So I will not take much of time because everyone is eagerly waiting for your insights, sir. I, Rishi Kumar, on behalf of IIM Bangalore and PGPPM batch of 2022, welcome you, sir, to embrace the occasion. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rishi Kumar. That was a very well done introduction. You got everything.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your nice
words. That was quite good. That was quite good. Okay, so let's see. You know, I might use a few slides. Just see that these are the growth rates in the post-reform era. The basic point I want to make is that after the reforms, growth rate did accelerate 6.4% between 92, 93 to 99 till 2000 was the first time that we had a period of about 7 or 8 years, about 7 years, when growth rate grew more than 6%. Growth rate was more than 6%, or the GDP grew at more than 6%. So the reforms did actually make a difference, but then growth rate did fall 4.2% for 3 years, 2000, 2001, 1, 2, 2, 3. Okay, that was a 3-year period. Then growth rate accelerated 8.2% for about 9 years. And then it fell below 6% again. That was a 2-year period, 12, 13, 13, 14. Then it rose back to 7.4, and 19, 20, it has fallen back to 4.2. Okay, we can look up the next one, and you'll see that these are the individual growth rates, and the times that the growth rates fell, I've shown in red bars. So what the point I want to convey is that there has been this pattern of growth rate accelerating, then for good period, 7, 8 years, then it sort of goes down, rises back up, goes down. So a bit of a cycle effect has been there, and that's the point where I want to start. Right. So this is where we were. So this cycling has happened, and the last slowdown that happened was you can call even the 18-19 was a bit slowed down, 6.1% growth rate had come down to 6.1 in 18-19. In 19-20, of course, fell to 4.2, and 4.2 was the lowest since the global financial crisis. So it was really a very serious slowdown. And my own kind of diagnosis of that is that it was very much because of the stress in the financial sector. I think we were slow to respond. You know, by late 2013, I was quite aware that this was a serious problem. Cleaning up of the NPAs was essential, but this cleaning up did not begin till about till about mid 2017, quite late. So both, I think, you know, on that one, if one wants to, there are, you know, plenty of people at which you can point the fingers, but two principal entities really that should have been earlier, should have started the process way earlier, were the RBI and the Department of Financial Services in the Ministry of Finance. Anyway, it didn't happen, and that financial stress in the end has cost us quite a bit. And so when COVID hit us, we actually started on a weak footing. We were already, the economy was already in stress, and then COVID was such a huge shock, unprecedented ever. You know, this was a shock to demand, this was a shock to supply, there was a shock to international trade, everything, you name it, you know, everything was shocked. I think the government handled it reasonably well. There are, you know, few problems here and there. We can, if they interest you, you can raise them later, and we can talk about those. But broadly speaking, my own take on this one is that the government was absolutely right to focus on ensuring that people had at least the necessities, meaning food and shelter. That's what the government focused on correctly, contrary to many calls that, you know, India should also go to town with these massive fiscal stimulus and so forth. Reason I think that the stimulus, big stimulus, would have been of no use at the time is that supply had been shocked very badly, and no amount of demand stimulus could have given a supply response. Your supply curve basically had become vertical at that point. And you know, you want to resort to demand stimulus only when the supply curve has some positive slope and demand is not doing its work fully. So then at that point you can generate some response. And it was also right in this sense that it needed to keep at least some ammunition available for later, because once you are unlocking, if demand weakness arises, then you at least are able to spend some more money on stimulating the demand. The second side of this equation was that you had a problem, of course, that firms that are in the long run, enterprises that are in the long run very viable, that are solvent, they may have to go under because of the cash flow problems. So on that front, the government again was correct that it massively tried to provide a relief on repayment of loans, and the second package. So first package was announced very quickly, as it needed to be after 24th March speech by the Prime Minister. I think by 26 or 27, they had announced that package for which principally focused on ensuring that the necessities were provided for. And then it was unlock began, I think, with the speech on 12th May, and after which the finance minister, I think from 13th May to 17th May, one after the other, 5-part press conference, one every day for 5 days. And in that, the finance minister outlined a number of these measures, particularly on the loan side. Government put in a lot of money to give guarantees to the banks so that the banks will not hesitate to loan. And so there's particularly $1 $3 trillion guaranteed fund created, so that way cash flow can continue. And again, I think that was the problem rightly handled. There were a lot of other smaller things, to address issues of loans in the NBFCs, some of the other ones, so I'll not go into all those details. But that package also included a number of reforms, which was a good thing. They took the opportunity to announce the reforms. These reforms were not going to do much in the immediate future, but they were more meant for future structural change. So, big reforms in agriculture. They have announced some sort of commitment to PSU policy, meaning, down the road, they will have some sort of public sector enterprise policy under which only the sectors that are identified as strategic will have the PSEs, and all the PSEs in the remaining sectors will be privatized. So there's a big kind of policy reform announcement. I think that's a very important announcement. They also thought of initiating some state level reforms through the promise that there is a 3% ceiling on the fiscal deficit of the states, and it was provided that some of the they said there will be a total of about 3% relaxation provided, but some of that relaxation will depend on the states undertaking certain reforms. So there's a good thing. Coal and mining sectors, some reforms there, liberalizing coal, particularly very important. Finally, commercial mining was introduced. Then there was electricity. Very important. That's a sector which is crying for these reforms. I'll not detail them yet here right now, but it was done. MSMEs, the definitions were liberalized, meaning that the limits on the investment and turnover, that particular investment that were much lower previously, were raised up. So that also, I think, is a more liberalizing measure. And finally, there was also something announced on rental housing, which I've written on. If you look at my book, India Unlimited, that is a case I make. This is not, what they've announced is not going to go very far, but at least there is some recognition in principle that we need rental housing, inexpensive or affordable rental housing for migrants that come through. Otherwise, you create all these slums. I think much more needs to be done. This is really band-aid for now, but nevertheless, for the first time, some clear recognition that that's required. So that is the roadmap of what was done. Now, you should recognize, I think this is a point not many people realize, that even with relatively restrained kind of fiscal policy, we would push the debt to GDP ratio from something like maybe about 72%, this is both center and state combined, to about 85% or more. So we will see the fiscal deficit rising to about 13% this year, even if nothing more is done. But the government will have to do some more. Actually, there are two sources of fiscal intervention that I see on the horizon. One is possibly some sort of demand stimulus may be required if the economy is opened up, workers are there, but there's not enough demand, and you begin to see this inventory accumulation at a fast pace. Then one would see that is an indication of deficiency in demand, and so some demand stimulus may have to be given. So that's one. The second, which is in fact going to be much more important, is that there is no question, and there is a good article in the Economist magazine, rather surprisingly. I think lately Economist magazine is not putting out great articles, but this one, read in the finance section. The author, I think, is a good one actually in the finance, what is it called, business finance section. Basically, it makes the point that you will see the NPAs, non-performing assets, rising quite dramatically, and so there will have to be another big round of recapitalization of the banks. And this is where I also think that, ultimately somewhere down the road, the government has to come out and bite the bullet and announce that there is a program for privatization of the banks. This kind of process in which so much of the public money, so much of the taxpayers' valuable resources have to be then given out to save the banks, which in the ultimate actually is going to the pockets of the large corporations, right? I mean, maybe some of the MSMEs too, but large corporates are big beneficiaries of these non-performing assets that ultimately are refinanced by the taxpayers' money. And I think that has to come to an end. And that's where I also want to note the fact that not a single rupee had to be put into the private banks to recapitalize them, because they did their lending more responsibly, and their NPAs are far, far below than the public sector bank NPAs. So those are the two sources I see down the road. So now, what do we do, right? From here on, what do we do? I think the problem still remains for India dealing with the infection, the COVID. And still the new cases that are coming up are very large in number. Now we are we in fact have become the highest contributors, largest contributors to the global infections. Death rate has also gone up. So the principal, I think, challenge, even not just on health, of course, it's a direct challenge on the health side, but principal challenge also for the economic recovery is dealing with COVID. We need to get these infections to come down, and that's a problem for the medical specialists to deal with. I think the government is providing the necessary resources, but that is where I think in the next 3 to 6 months, that's where the action is going to be. Hopefully we will have a vaccine by the end of the year, and we start vaccinating. That I think would be the much surer kind of road to at least medical recovery. On the economic recovery itself, I think, once medical recovery happens, economic recovery will happen. I mean, I'm quite optimistic on that. People want to come back to work. We have seen that all around, even in terms of the migrants. Many of the migrants had barely arrived back home, and they were ready to return. And many of them have actually returned. At least there have been some reports of a few 100,000 returning to Mumbai and so forth. So I personally think that, maybe we'll need some small demand stimulus at some point, but I don't see that as a major issue. Major issue in my view still remains the recovery against the infections. So that's where I would leave the short run side of the story. Now I want to come to the long run story. That's where I want to spend another 15, 20 minutes, maybe. Let's see how are we doing. Good. So we're about 20 minutes into the lecture. So we got 20, 25 minutes, and I want to really talk a bit about the long-term future of the Indian economy. So there are many different ways we can come to it. The way I like to come to it is that what has happened, I think, in our process of development is that we really have, created too many tiny economic units. Maybe the politics was really in that direction, and so maybe it couldn't have been helped, but we need to recognize it. We have two options. Ultimately, I think we will transform. We will become richer. We will become more modern. We will become more urban. I have no doubt that will happen. The real issue is that, do we want to do it slow at the kind of speed that America, Germany, France, United Kingdom did so, taking maybe 100 years or more? Maybe, well, we have already taken 70, so we are talking about maybe not 100, but 150. Or we do it in the next 30. I mean, so either we do it in the next 70, 80 years, or we do it in the next 20 to 30 years. I would like us to do it in the next 20 to 30, and it's certainly doable. But that requires recognition of the fact that when you concentrate everything in these very tiny units, economic efficiency remains low. And particularly when tiny units are the ones, or small units are the ones that dominate your economic landscape. So I'll give you some numbers now. So start out with the broad structure of the economy. So I'll use the numbers which are in my head, which is 1718 PLFS, the Periodic Labor Force Survey. So by that survey, there's been 1819, so some small revisions have happened, but for basic purposes, 1718 are quite okay. So 1718, 44% of our workforce was in agriculture, farming. Now, and then the remaining 56% is in industry and services. I'll come to farming again in a minute, but for what is happening in industry and services, within industry and services, you got another, I think 42%, another 42% of the workforce, which is in enterprises that are less than 20 workers. Okay, that 44 plus 42 brings you to 86%. And only about 9% roughly are known to be in enterprises that are more than 20 workers. Okay, and there are some 5-6% we can't figure in the survey, so it says not known. That is roughly your distribution of the workforce. And now I want to go back and unpack each of these. What is happening? What is the story with the 44% who are in the workforce? So we don't know the story now purely in terms of the work employment, meaning who is employed where. What we do know from a different census, which is the agricultural census, is that we got some, and agricultural census is 15-16, but that's good enough because the land ownership doesn't change that rapidly. You got some 70 million farms according to this census. Now 70 million, so roughly 70 million families dependent on those farms. Every one of those 70 million farms is less than half hectare, and the average size of that farm is less than a quarter hectare. 0.23 hectare is the average size of these 70 million farms. Now you can imagine how much you can produce on that kind of farm. It can't, if you've got a family of 5, that's absolutely by not any standard sufficient to give you an income on which you can live. For a family of 5, that gives you about half of what the poverty line income in India is. So it's clearly, it's not something, But you also know that this is not going to be a high productivity sector. Now, even if you double or triple the income of these people, it's still too low. First of all, it's not a joke to double or triple agricultural income. And I'll explain in a minute why. But even if you do that, even if you triple it, it's still very low. So you don't make them prosperous. You're not going to get to, when I was talking about transforming, whether you do it in 20 to 30 years or whether you do it in another 70 to 80 years, you're not going to get there by doubling or tripling the incomes of these people. Also, what about your farm distress? Now, farm distress happens everywhere. In America, I see that happen. You have floods, you have drought, you have frost. Any one of those things comes in, there is farmer distress. But farmers here are less than 5% of the workforce. The remaining 95% can take care of it. When you have 44% there, and a very small proportion of your urban population paying the taxes, because effectively that's the only section of the population which has enough income to pay taxes. How are you going to take care of the 44%? So this farmer distress you cannot deal with. We think that Every time distress happens, we create some new program that will do this, will do that. But, you know, there are not enough revenue resources. I mean, you know, you can add up all that, add up the Narega, but Narega anyway is not a pure transfer. It takes away the workers' labor in return for the wages. But you can add up PM Kisan, you can add up National Food Security Act, you can add up all the money that gets spent on livelihood programs. You have it, you know, whatever you want to add up, it's not going to add up to a prosperous existence for the farmers. At the end of the day, you have no option but to get this worker population down to a decent number, like, you know, 15-20% of the total workforce. Without it, no matter what we do, you can do all the loan mafia, you can do everything. Farmer distress is not going to go away. That will remain. I mean, as I say, it remains in America also, but at least, you know, you can deal with it because there are plenty of resources from the remaining 95%. So then you come to the industry. So that's this, when I said, you know, we are a nation of tiny units. And that goes, by the way, also in all sorts of things, you know, the number of habitations we got in the country, so large. So any infrastructure you need to bring, you to bring very far. And so, you know, the very sparsely I come from Rajasthan, where the population density is so low in many very tiny little habitations. You know, how do you bring the good life to these people? It's very difficult. It's just, and that also means that, you know, when it comes to education, for instance, you end up with these very tiny little fragmented schools because we don't want children to move. You know, in my father's time, there was no issue, you know, that my father went, you know, there was no school in the village. So he walked to another place. So he went and studied in another place, but at 10 years, he walked 12 miles in a day to get to where the school was. And then his uncle and aunt lived there, so he lived there. But I mean, the point is, we want to bring school within 1 kilometer of everybody. We think that, you know, things can happen without hardship. It doesn't. I mean, you know, somebody has to bear the pain. Somebody has to make some effort, so one needs to have some consolidation. You know, these smaller units in the end are, if it's public services, it's very costly. And if it is a productive service, then the productivity is extremely low. Come to industry and services. Now, I mentioned to you already about, you know, 42% of the workforce total, and not just within industry and services, 42% of the total workforce is in companies that are less than 20 workers. But even within this, the dominantly what you have is firms, a lot of self-employment. You know, we have this concept of what we call the own account enterprises. Own account enterprises are the enterprises which have no hired workers whatsoever. Okay, they are all self-employed, meaning that they do not hire any workers. Very large part of this 42% workforce is in those kinds of enterprises. And the productivity is low. I'll show you some numbers, you know, when I get again to the presentation. Now, and when it comes to even, you know, even if you take this, you know, 19 or fewer, these are very small enterprises. Why does this matter? The reason it matters is that, you know, it's not that small enterprises cannot be productive. In China, small enterprises are also quite productive, in fact. We have the history of Taiwan. We have the history of Japan, where small enterprises, or medium-sized enterprises, they've been productive. The problem we have is that we basically have only small enterprises, largely speaking, except, you know, most of our larger enterprises are in sectors where technology, which simply not allow small, you know, automobile industry. How do you do small? You cannot. Petroleum refining, how do we do? You cannot. So we, you know, even pharmaceuticals, etc. At least medium, large is what you need. So we have, but these are in these sectors that technologically meant for large, at least some degree, I mean, certainly even auto plants, if we compare our auto plants to the Chinese or Americans, ours are still quite small actually. Maruti might be about the only one which has some size. But when it comes to the more labor intensive sectors, and this is where I think the crux of the problem is, that at the end of the day, if you are trying to create good jobs, high productivity jobs that can pay good wages, where are they going to be? They will have to be in the labor intensive sectors such as apparel, footwear, furniture, lots of these different light manufacturers that China still continues to export in vast volumes. Because you cannot, we always think that, oh, our IT industry is going to do these wonders and so forth. But does anybody believe that you can bring farmers into IT industry, or a lot of the workers that work in your own households, the domestic help and so forth, are they going to be employees in the IT industry, finance industry, petroleum refining? They don't have those skills. I think, if you're going to try to bring them over the next 15, 20, 30 years, it'll have to be in these low skill kind of professions. And for that, you need scaling up of these enterprises. Now, I raised the question, that why our enterprises that are small are not so productive compared to China's or compared to Taiwan's or Japan's. The fact is that it is the near absence of large and medium enterprises. If you look at apparel, you look at footwear, we just don't have very large firms. You might find 2 or 3. I mean, I know of, like in apparel, I know that there are at least 3 or 4 substantial enterprises, but that's not enough. See, the whole ecosystem is defined by the presence of large and medium enterprises. So in manufacturing, these are 2005 figures. In manufacturing, if you look at China-India comparison, China had at about 50% in large enterprises, large defined as enterprises with 200 or more workers each, medium as 50 to 199. So large had about 50%, medium had about 25%, and then the small were remaining about 25%. In India, small is less than 50. So in India, you got 86%. This is again 2006 figures for 2005 figures for India. The small enterprises less than 50 workers had about 86% of the workforce in manufacturing. Well, then you got remaining 40% in between medium and large. That doesn't give you enough traction in the labor markets to create high productivity in these smaller enterprises. What you need is, and we talk a lot about MSMEs, but we focus only on the first M, micro. We forget the other M. And medium-sized firms in India are practically extinct. I mean, there's so few. And what you need really is the medium, is the second M in that MSME that you need to really emphasize and encourage, at least create an ecosystem. I don't believe in, that creating subsidies and so forth. It's the general policy framework that needs to address that kind of problem. So, and the idea is this, that, if more medium and large enterprises begin to emerge in these labor intensive sectors, they will begin to draw labor from the remaining smaller enterprises. As they do that, that is going to create tightness in the labor market. Smaller enterprises will also have to then shape up. And as more and more medium and large enterprises come in, smaller enterprises often become ancillaries of those medium and large enterprises, either that or they have to compete against these. And either way, that means working much harder, paddling much faster, making your workers work harder, employ them full time. I mean, as it is, in our system, so much underemployment. Unemployment is only 6%. That's not nothing to fret about. Our press makes it up into a big deal. But 6% unemployment is, natural rate of unemployment in most countries. But what we have is massive amount of underemployment. I mean, you can see that. I remember in Delhi when I lived, you call for any small little thing, 3 people will show up, only 1 is doing the job. The other 2 are watching, or they are carrying the instruments of the fellow who is going to do the work, whether it's plumber or electrician or whoever else. So, massive underemployment also in the offices, not just of public sector, even private sector. You would see that, 2 or 3 of the people sitting outside the offices, even in private sector offices, doing very little. And so obviously they have got free time on their hands. Why should they be? I don't see that in any of the economies that have transformed themselves. Labor markets are very tight. And so that's what you really need. Now, very quickly, I will show you the slides on some of the things that I have just said, except that when I tried to do this, I lost my presentation. So let me see if I can bring it back. So let me race through this. Okay. So here is the slide which shows, what has been happening. So these are the numbers based on the National Sample Survey, Employment and Unemployment Survey, which is still 17-18. And what you would see is that these 3 graphs are tracking the share, tracking the number of workers in agriculture. That's the top line, blue one. Then you got the middle one, gray, that is services, and the bottom one, which is manufacturing or industry, really not manufacturing, but industry, which includes electricity and mining and quarrying, etc. What you would see is look at the blue line. Till as late as 11-12, your absolute number of farmers is still rising. Transformation is not happening. You see, economic transformation is all about, workers moving out of agriculture into industry and services. And while the share is declining, actually, even during these years, the absolute numbers are still rising. And services are the ones which are taking, and you can see at the last one, 11-12 to 17-18, you finally see that decline. But even that, between 4-5 to 11-12 and 11-12 to 17-18, that's where you see, so here, this is from 4-5 to 11-12, 11-12 to 17-18. You see decline. Lot of that decline actually is coming from the decline in the women participation, female participation rates in the labor force in rural areas. So even then, it's not so much that the labor workers are finally migrating to the urban areas at a much faster pace, but it's because with some increase in incomes after 4-5 in particular, a lot of the women who are in the workforce doing very, very hard work, they probably started withdrawing that, look, now we have enough, so women don't have to go out for such hard work. I don't know, that's my hypothesis that is what led to the withdrawal of so many women out of the workforce, although I'm not for, nobody has tested the hypothesis. So therefore that is but the fact of women having withdrawn from the workforce is true. That shows up very clearly. So you can see that, with that, it is going to be very hard, and you can see that translates into a very, very low expansion of value added per worker in agriculture. Okay, so this graph gives you agricultural output per worker in constant 4-5 rupees. And since constant 4-5 rupees, GDP series goes only up to 11-12. This graph is taking you only up to 11-12 because I'm trying to use the series with constant, the GDP series at constant prices. But you can see till 4-5, nothing. Very, very mild kind of rise in value added per worker. So you can see where the problem is. I'm just only right now giving you the diagnosis. That's the problem. Let's go further. So now for 17-18, because of the fact that now my base year changes to 11-12. So for what I've done is for 17-18, I've given you some absolute per worker output or per worker value added. Look at where agriculture is compared to industry and services. Now, industry and services is not that dramatically high, but they are higher. I mean, there's no doubt that industry and services are definitely higher, but not dramatically high. Still they're decent, but not big. But compare that to agriculture. Industry is about 4 times agriculture, and services is about 3 times agriculture. You got simply too many workers in agriculture, the underemployment that I've been talking about. Very quick look at the South Korean experience, so that you can see how transformation happens. Here it is. First of all, exports of goods and services as percentage of GDP. 1960 starts at 3.2. Well, 65 is where, 63, 64 is where the economy took off in South Korea. And from that, so at that point, it's about, 64, 65, this is where it is. About, then it's about 5%. And bang, by whatever that year is, 38%, something like 1990 or so. Exports are the drivers. And this is all connects back to my argument about medium and large firms. Because small firms by themselves don't export. It is the medium and large which do. And small firms can, if there are large and medium firms, then they hook up into medium and large and may be able to export. All right, so here you go. Now the transformation that you are seeing here, this is the percentage share of GDP of the 3 sectors. And you'll see how the green line, bang, it really kind of, sorry. It goes down from, again, 65, it's about at 40%, goes down to below 10% by 1990. Now, that has happened in India also, by the way. We have been able to reduce the share in GDP of agriculture quite dramatically. It's down to about 15%, 14%. So that this part of the transformation that you see on this graph has happened. What has not happened is this transformation, which is employment share. Now, employment share, look at Korea. So I started about 60, almost 70%. Bang, it comes down to below 20% by 1990. Today, it's below 10% in Korea. It's dramatic, and this is why, and during this phase, by the way, if you look at 60s and 70s and 80s, real wages in the industry and services are rising about at 10% a year. I mean, just imagine that how much labor it is absorbing. And even while absorbing that labor, it is able to keep the real wages rising from at the rate of about 9 to 10%. Very dramatic. What else? Urban population. Here it again 65. This is flat at about 28%, and bang, by 1999 you got 88% population urban. You look at the Indian urbanization rate, 2 percentage points per decade since 1950. And it's not dramatically accelerated. The last one we have between 2001 and 11 is maybe 3%, a little over 3, but nothing dramatic yet. One hopes that it will change now. So that is where we are. And now looking ahead, reality check 2. This is about the too many workers employed in tiny firms. And you will see that's the distribution, less than 5 workers. So this is proportions taken over the workforce, which is only in industry and services. Okay? So this is a proportion within industry and services. So 56%, more than half, are in less than 5 workers, or up to 5 or less, 5 or fewer, 6 to 9, another 11. This is where you got, about 16% of your, these are 16% out of that remaining 56%, which are in industry and services. That's about it. Not known is 8.8. Now this gives you, I talked about own account enterprises, and you can see now share in employment. So these are all unincorporated enterprises where the bulk of the industry and services workforce is. Okay, unincorporated meaning they're largely their proprietorship or partnership. But you can then also divide them as own account versus establishment. Own account are the enterprises which do not employ any hired workers. Establishments are the enterprises which do hire 1 or more hired workers. How is the workforce here? The survey counts about 111 million people employed in these unincorporated enterprises. It undercounts, I think, but anyway, that's what it counts. Out of those 111 million, 62% are in own account enterprises, about 38% are in establishment. But remember that even in establishment, not all workers are hired workers. They also have self-employed. So the hired workers are even fewer. Value added per worker, own account enterprises, this is not even, doesn't even become close to agriculture, 73,951 rupees and 1516. These are all current rupees. Now you can also look at the establishment where it is higher, but it's roughly where, it's a little bit more than what it was in 1718 in agriculture. It's a little more. In agriculture was probably 130,000 rupees. This is 152,000 rupees. But try dividing it over a family of fives, not a lot. Okay, that's it. Now I come to the size, and this is the India-China comparison, which I mentioned to you. So here you got China, 51% of the workforce, 52% actually in the large enterprises, 23.3 in the medium, altogether 75, less than about 25% in small. India, 84%. Sorry, I misspoke. I said 86. 84% are. This is all manufacturing. 5.5% in medium size and just 10.5 in this in the large. So that's manufacturing as a whole, but this also includes industries like auto, machinery industry, petroleum refining, where technology mandates you to be large. Productivity. Now, why does this matter? Remember I said that when medium and large are relatively missing, then the small also end up with low productivity. And that is the beautiful comparison for the same year, 2005, between China and India. And I sort of now in this, what we have done is to normalize productivity in the large enterprises at 100 in both India and China. Now remember that China's productivity in the large is way higher than India's productivity in the similar enterprises, way larger, no question. But we are still doing only comparison by normalizing both of them to 100. And then we are comparing that to what the productivity is in medium and small enterprises. And you can see in small enterprises in India, it is less, 21, 22% of what it is in the large enterprises. What about China? 60%. So even the small ones then become a lot more productive. And that's the point. Now think about it. 84% are in small. 84% of the workforce is manufacturers, both of those. 84% are in small. This large part of the workforce is getting only 20%. So the wages, roughly would be wage comparison would be roughly similar. That the workers in the small in India would get only about 21, 22% of the wages that are there in the large enterprises. In China, small enterprises would also get wages up to about 60% of what they are in China. And that's a big difference. Okay, so I think we are getting there. So very quickly, I've described that. Finally, why the firm size matters. And that's where you can see, large firms exist in China, hundreds of thousands of workers under a single roof. You got towns that produce only buttons, towns that produce only lingerie, towns that produce only shirts. So, the scale is there, agglomeration is there. And you can see there's not a big difference if you look at, the difference between India and China in 1999. This is all $1 billion current. And the comparison gap was $25 billion. But look what happened by the time we got to 2014, 186 billion versus 17.7 billion. We look so flat. I mean, we went up, we also tripled, you could say, right? I mean, if you do the own comparison, we tripled. But of course, China, a lot more than tripled. It was not merely kind of, building on their larger base, but they did grow a lot faster. And that's where the jobs are. That's where the jobs are. Footwear. Again, look at that, 8.7 billion and us, not even a billion in 99. and 56 billion. Lots of jobs there. Lots of jobs there. Electrical goods. This was phenomenal. Look at 1999, 44%, 44 billion, 782 billion. The scale is very different here now. 44 to 782 billion. This is just 2014. So you can see, because they were large enterprises, massive size. So that's roughly, and Shenzhen is my model, and I therefore, if you read my book India Unlimited, I talk a bit about creating these autonomous employment zones. And my model here is Shenzhen. This is the last one we'll look at. Look at this 1980. So a group of fishing villages with a population of no more than 300,000. Today, one of the most urbanized spots on the face of the earth. Population of 12 million. GDP 265 billion, about 25 billion, $25,000 or 30,000 roughly. That's how high the per capita income is in Shenzhen. And the native population is Cantonese. Native population in Shenzhen is Cantonese, but it has drawn so many migrants that the actual dominant language is Mandarin. You got 20 million from just 300,000. So obviously these are people who come from outside, and that's a great example of very massive migration from countryside into a spot which was converting from rural to urban. So that's the kind of what one needs if we want to be transforming in the next 20 to 30 years. So let's stop there. Sorry, I went up a bit over time, but I hope it was helpful.
So, sir, we have got a lot of questions, around more than 20. So I will try to, I have been reading them. I will try to do the justice of combining them because going through. So most of the questions are around the labor. Like a lot of labor movement happen, and availability of labor is in dilemma now, and also this has given the push to the industry towards automation and use of latest technologies like AI, ML, robotics. So we can take that as the first question, sir.
Good. So this is the what I call the robophobia. The robotics phobia. Look, clothes are not about to disappear, meaning, that robots, even technological feasibility of robots making clothes is very far away. That's not an industry which is being taken over by robots. Footwear, what is it? Adidas tried to do fully automated factories, one in Germany and one in the United States. It has closed them down both, meaning they're moving to China or somewhere else. So some of these industries are not about to, that's my first point to always remember. You need two things for automation to happen. One is that technological feasibility, and the second is the commercial viability. So there are many other things. Tesla, for example, what's the name of the owner of Tesla?
Elon Musk.
Musk, right? Elon Musk. So he tried to automate that completely, and then he had to backtrack because it didn't work. And he apologized, saying that that was my mistake. That I tried to automate too much. So because commercially it didn't work out. I mean, he had the technology to do it, but it was not viable commercially. So don't freeze into these kind of fears that, machines are going to take over. This story has played over and over and over again. Because one of the things always, here is my favorite kind of story I like to tell. That, this was in the 1980s. This is just an imagined story, not a real one. I think it's imagined, maybe it's real too. But somebody, this fellow coming from the United States, passing through China. And so he sees these people, using shovels to dig the foundations of houses that they are building. So he says, why don't you get a few bulldozers? You can do it much faster and at a far lower cost. So yeah, we know that. That's we know about bulldozers, but the problem is that the jobs will be lost if we give them bulldozers, bring bulldozers here. So he said, well, then you should replace these shovels by spoons. चम्मच दे दो इसकी जगह, कि तो बहुत jobs create हो जाएंगे. That's the point. That if you use these technologies that are commercially viable, then your scale will rise. Whereas previously you were building 10 houses using shovels, with bulldozers you will build 1,000 houses. So what you lose in employment per house, you will recover in the number of houses that you would build. And it's the same thing. Let automation happen. But productivity would rise enough that you would manufacture a lot more, you would produce a lot more. So I don't, this whole, that's why I call it robophobia.
Thank you, sir. I'll move on to next question. Thank you for your elaborative answer. Now, sir, the next question is on the policy response. That question has been asked from Bipin, Mr. Bipin Talati and Arpit Sachan, that we have a lot of targets, like we have to target the inflation, we have to target our fiscal deficit. Under these circumstances, to recover from COVID, what should be our policy response?
No, the fiscal has gone out of the whack already. I think, and anyway, FRBM Act provides for it. That this is clearly an emergency situation, and therefore you can invoke the flexibility that is provided in the FRBM Act, and we have done that. This year the deficit as of now is expected to about 13%, and it may end up a bit more. So even inflation actually now is running at about 6% currently. And I'm not, I'm not an inflation hawk, so I'm not worried actually. I think, let's have a little bit more inflation. There's no harm, because that also means that the nominal GDP would rise, nominal profits would rise, and that may, help the economic activity a bit. You don't want to let it go too far, 7-8%, but you certainly have to then cap it there. Although the target for the RBI currently is 6, but in this situation, you see, nobody is going to hang the RBI if it crosses 6%. But for our own good, I think you don't want the inflationary expectations to get out of hand. That is very crucial, because it took a lot of hard work and some pain to bring that inflationary expectations down. So you don't want to let it go back to 10% or more.
Next is from the Ekta Jain. During the pandemic, we have seen the labor crisis, since they did not have saving to see them through the month ago. How we can address prosperity, a better standard of living for labor's workforce, and bringing them to work for medium or large size enterprises.
So you want the roadmap? Yeah, well, so that is, you have to read my book, India Unlimited. I deal with a number of issues. It's not a matter of one single reform, but there's a large number of, very quickly, land markets are very inflexible today. Any large scale firm needs, 50 to 100 acres of land, and getting a contiguous piece of land, which is 50 to 100 acres, is an absolute challenge for the companies in India. So I talk about what are the possible solutions there, but that's one problem one needs to solve. Labor markets were inflexible, and labor market reform has to happen. Financial sector, it's all factor markets. All three factor markets right now have very serious challenges. And financial sector, again, it has not recovered from its earlier shocks, and now it is going to get another big shock here. So that also will need to, but I suggest though also that Shenzhen, which is why I discussed Shenzhen, that create, these autonomous employment zones where you can make labor market, countrywide you may have difficulty because some of the issues are anyway state level issues. some are central government issues and all. So create some of these, what I call the autonomous employment zones, not many. One thing, one problem in India we always do is that we start something and we want to have many of those. Every state has to have one at least. That is not the way China did. Nobody did it that way. You do it where the costs are low, where the productivity is high. That's where you do, and start out with maybe 4, 5, no more than 6, absolutely no more than 6, and 2 or 3 of these near the coast. And what you do is that, if you give a lot of local, a lot of authority to the local administration to decide what their labor laws will be, what their land laws will be, land conversion laws would be, just delegate to them. This is what Shenzhen can write its own labor laws. They have their own land laws. So there is a lot of local autonomy. So you at least experiment with that. And a lot of my sense is that today, if you create those zones, a lot of multinationals will very quickly come to those zones. And that will actually give you a good head start. And you don't need too many, for the initial ones, you can, anybody who employs 10,000 workers, maybe you can give some, some holiday from GST or something, for maybe 5 years or something like that. But nothing more, just a very clear kind of sunset clause on that, because I don't believe in subsidies. But if you provide good policies, good environment, I think companies will come.
Right. Thank you, sir, for
and
that
workers
elaboration.
will know, by the way, so with this fear somehow that, translating what we saw, some of these stresses that we saw on the migrant workers, don't translate them into any long-term issue. Workers who migrate are ambitious people, and they are there to take the hardship. I mean, any of you who know, I imagine many of you must have had people in your own families, either father or grandfather, who must have migrated from rural to urban areas. And you know that they are different people, they are ambitious, driven, they want challenges. So they'll come. It's the opportunities which are lacking, you see. I mean, look, we lived for 3 years in Delhi. The man who used to be our cook and all was coming from Bihar. And he was dying for that job, that please employ me. It's not, the workers really want to make their life better.
Moving to, sir, our next question, which is from Mr. Sankalp Abhishek. He wants to know that most of the major economies have focused on education and health sector, but largely this sector has been ignored by our country. So your thoughts on that, sir?
Okay. Now, see, education we have not ignored. It's simply our ability to deliver. Now, take for example South Korea. By late 60s, South Korea was close to 90% or higher literacy rate. South Korea was damn poor at that time. There is no way they could have spent a whole lot of money. But they knew how to deliver. They, one of the policies was that everybody who had a college degree was required to go and teach in schools for 5 years. Park Chung-hee, the Prime Minister, the President of Korea, who really I regard as, he's the father of Korea in my, because he was a dictator. Eventually, many people in South Korea itself have disowned him. But what Lee Kuan Yew did in Singapore is what Park Chung-hee did in Korea. He taught for 5 years himself before, he was a military general and all. And they ran 3 shifts, 4 shifts in the schools, because the school buildings are also short. So it's this ability to deliver that kept us behind. It's not that we didn't spend the money, and even now, at least education, we are spending 4% of the GDP. And that does not count how much the families are spending. Because half of the education has moved, school education has moved into private schools. In the cities, more than half. But even in villages, when you count the whole thing, almost half has moved. Our serious problem in school education is unsolvable. It's politically unsolvable problem, which is that we are sinking this money into giving teacher salaries. Go back, look at what teacher salaries are, and then look back what they are giving you in terms of return on that investment and that money you're spending every year. It is gigantic. You know, 2/3 of the primary public schools, 2/3 of the what we call the elementary public schools, 2/3 have less than 100 students. Average about 50, 52, something like that. You have 5 or 7, if you just average it out, you see it amounts to about 5 to 7 students per class. And so you are spending practically 70, 80,000 or more on teacher salaries alone in there. You are sinking the money there, there is no return. How do I solve that problem? You cannot. The new education policy comes in and says, oh, we have to raise this to 6%. Why would you raise it? There's plenty of teachers in the system today. If you look back how much, you know, when you look at the schools which have so few students, the teacher pupil ratios have dropped to 10 something, 12, so very low in about 2/3 of these schools. So the only way, I can suggest ways out, but politically will the system take it? And I'm very doubtful that it will take it. You know, I mean, to me, if it was up to me, I would say whatever average per pupil amount I'm spending just on salaries, even forget the rest, building ko chhod do. Whatever per pupil money I'm spending on teacher salary in the public sector, make that available to the pupil or to the parents of the pupil. Allow them to go and invest it wherever they want. Invest meaning that it has to be in the form of a voucher. They can bring it back to the public school. If public school is good, they will bring it back to the public school. If they see that public school is no good, then they will go and give it to the private school. That is the only way you can, you know, begin to get some quality and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, we can design whatever solutions we want to design. You know, I mean, on the paper, the rest of the policy for schools, the new education policy looks fine. This foundational learning by the 2nd grade, I think it's a very good idea. We need to do that. Will our teachers deliver that? I'm very skeptical. You know, we keep thinking that, oh, we will design this new solution and that new solution, this will be different this time. It is not. I mean, I think you're dealing still with the same teachers who have no motivation. They got the salary. Once they become permanent teachers, they are permanent. End of the story. And state government sits in the state capital. They are back there in some little district, sometimes even in rural areas. Who is going to monitor them? Nobody can monitor them.
Thank you, sir.
So I'm sorry. I mean, I think on this one, I come out rather pessimistic. So you know, not that there are no solutions, but simply there are no politically feasible solutions there. In fact, in medical, I think not by design, but by default, we ended up relying a lot on the private sector. On the whole, I think that was a better model. And I think on Ayushman Bharat also, what we have done, which is to allow both public and private sector hospitals to compete. We have tried to, you know, give entry to both. I think that's a very good idea. So Ayushman Bharat is a better idea. This is why I think, you know, raising that 4% from education to 6%, I would rather use that extra 2 percentage points on something like Ayushman Bharat. Because that money then goes to the recipients. They get it, that up to 5 lakh rupees, I get the insurance. I decide where I'm going to spend it. I think that will go a much longer way to yield a little better results. I mean, I'm not a fan in this services sector. I mean, in these public services, I'm not a fan of private sector. But what I see is that I've got 2 evils to deal with, and who is the lesser evil? And I think, you know, in the end, if I empower the people, that I think is a little bit better. I mean, if the government was capable, I mean, if it was the Chinese government or the Korean, I mean, Korean government was very capable also. Or if you want to go Lee Kuan Yew, you know, if we got somebody like that delivering, that's different. But that's not the case with our public sector.
Right. Thank you, sir, for this a very insightful answer related to the implementation of lacks in your education system. Sir, moving on to next question from Mr. Arvind Supla. He has asked that your focus has been on the manufacturing and producing big firms. So how in
No, no,
India
not
we
just
can.
big, medium and large, medium and large.
Yes, sir. So his question is more on the larger side of the story. How we can create large firms in India? What we need to do, sir?
Yeah. So this is partly I answered to you, when I talked about the autonomous employment zones. But this goes back to the labor land reforms and so forth. But one shorter cut to that is simply make it easier for the multinationals to move into the country. See, the big advantage the multinationals is that they got their own technology, they got their own management practices, they got their own capital, and above everything else, they got the links to the global markets. They are already operating in the global marketplace. So they don't, our firms, when we granularly, locally try to create large firms, it's a little harder because they have to go out and look for world markets. That's it, specialized skills. The multinationals come with that. And so once they are there, they can then easily allow, help local firms can then observe what these guys are doing and all very easily then copy them. So the route to that I see as, because now the Chinese wages are so high. And then there are all these other problems that have arisen because of, any non-Chinese multinational wants to go out. They want at least another production base somewhere else. They are looking for diversification out of China. So the opportunity is big right now. But we have to do the right things to see that they don't go to Vietnam or Bangladesh or Cambodia, that they come to us. I mean, right now, most of them are actually going to the other countries in the Southeast Asia.
Sir, in electronic manufacturing, a lot of new programs has come where product link incentives, and a lot of firms has showed interest in manufacturing. So hopefully in those sectors, we are doing the right things.
Yeah, so I recently wrote an article, I think, on Times of India or somewhere. But if you look at the numbers, right? I mean, in electronics industry, because I was there at least, starting January 15 to 17.
Yes, sir.
Even before I arrived, they had started doing some of this import substitution stuff, and the custom duty had been raised to 12-13% and all. We all call it, we say that, oh, they have a 10% disability or 12% disability. I mean, we don't try to address why the disability is there. We say, I'll correct your disability. How will I correct it? I'll give you 12% protection. Which of course means that you are going to sell in my domestic market, because that's the only place you can survive, because I've not corrected the actual disability. So when I say I'll give you this 12% extra tariff, I'm telling him to come and sell in my domestic market. They will not become the large exporters. If you look at the export figures in electronics industry, go back, you can look at 13, 14 or 12, 13, I quote the numbers. If you Google out, you'll find the number somewhere. 7-8 billion then and 8 billion now. Those are our exports. Imports in the meantime have gone up from 31-32 billion to about 50 plus. So true, some manufacturers have come in, but here also, if you look at like the latest policy that they announced, production linked incentive, PLI, there is one set of incentives for the foreign firms and another set for the domestic firms. For the foreign firms, you say over a 5-year period, something like, you have to invest 5,000 crore rupees. For the domestic firms, 200 crores is enough. What are you doing? You said foreign firms, if you're large. Domestic, small also goes fine. Well, these guys will never export. You tell me that in 6 years' time, lots of these small assembly firms of mobile phones have come up. You name me one that is that you think will be a truly gigantic export firm. Not one. Lava is the largest, and even Lava is not going to turn, has not turned 6 years. I mean, the owner of Lava came to me, see me back in actually 2015 itself, very early 2015. So he has been there for now easily 5 years at least. Is he is he about to turn into this export machine? I don't think so. So, I mean, it's good that something is happening in the electronics industry. I'm happy, but if the goal is to transform in next 25 to 30 years, so that we are somewhere near at least where Korea was maybe 10 years ago, or where China is today, then we are going too slow.
Sir, next question is on that, like with compared to China.
One thing, what happens is policy-wise, you should understand. When you say that I'll give you subsidy, I'll give you protection.
Yes,
Effectively, what you are doing is to invite the small firms. Firms, then they see that there is a assured market. Market is here. If I assemble the phones with some subsidy plus this 12-13% protection, I can make quick profit. So those are the kinds of firms that come in. They are not coming in with long-term horizon. I'm going to become a gigantic exporter, because uske liye there is not the ecosystem. You are not created the real disabilities have not been solved.
Sir, our next question is from Ravi Chandra. He wants to ask about startups are facing a lot of investment shortage. Then foreign investments are coming in here. How we can shift from traditional saving to investment into these firms? Like how we can create an ecosystem where these startups are rightly supported in India, sir.
Look, so that's a specialized area. From talking to the venture capitalists in India, it seems to me that there's enough, as far as capital is concerned, there's enough coming into that. So, I mean, the traditional way, of course, we know is the banks and so forth, or in NBFCs. And there is the issue. Now, there is a larger issue of financialization. So a lot of the savings are not flowing through the banking system or through the financial sector. So that's work in progress. I think, that part is work in progress. But for the startups, though, you need more like, angel investors and venture capitalists. But my understanding is that people who are doing good projects to get it. But I could be wrong. I think there you talk to somebody like Mohandas Pai or people do the investing.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. The next question is from Rishi Kumar. He wants to ask which sector of the economy are likely to recover fastest and which will be slow. And do you think that this crisis will introduce income equality in India?
Well, first of all, on the first one, good economists don't try to predict which sectors. We believe in good policies. If we could really figure it out, then Planning Commission in 50 years would have figured that out. The only reason we are where we are is because Planning Commission couldn't figure it out. So I want which sectors, but what I believe, as I said, in good policies. So we have to think in those terms. Inequality, there's a short-term phenomenon, so it's hard to predict. I can argue both ways. And by the way, also I worry a lot less, at least in the Indian context, I worry a lot less about inequality. I worry a lot more about poverty. Is it going to create poverty? Right? I mean, that's a question, very legitimate question to ask. Would it have some sort of lasting impact on poverty? I mean, I'm an optimist on that, and I just don't think that will be the case. By the way, the government has done very large number of very important reforms. It's only, my complaint is largely about the trade policy. I think on trade policy, we have turned the wheel back, returning to some of this import substitution. which is a mistake. But beyond that, the government has done some incredibly important reforms. The impact, positive impact of those reforms is still not happened. Maybe 10, 12%, 15% has happened. But the bulk of the impact is still to come. Only I wish that we would return to the open, outward-oriented trade policies that will magnify the positive impact of the reforms. But remember that, you know, the reforms that for 5 years Narasimha Rao, Prime Minister Narasimha Rao did, after that 6 years Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee did, those ultimately the big impact came starting in 2003-04. You know, that was the period. Then we grew about 8.3%, 8.2 or 8.3%. So, so that's the kind of impact I would expect a lot of the reforms that Modi government has done. And right now, for example, in the higher education reform that has now happened, well, legislation is still to come. So it's still, but medical reform that I did, and that has happened, legislation is now in place. And finally, this, you know, the Higher Education Commission Act that is going to come. I think that eventually the impact will be with a lot of lag, but it will happen. So those are very important reforms. The corporate profit tax, knocking that down to, you know, some 24%, 25% for new manufacturing firms, 17%. That's a huge thing. So all that is going to pay off, but we have to wait.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Rajeshwaran. Sir, one last question, and I owe it to Gaurav. So Gaurav has just asked, what are our views on why did India withdraw from RCEP? Why did India withdraw from RCEP?
Oh, at least as I understood, it was not a withdrawal. At the time, the government said that the deal on the table is not good enough. So India had not withdrawn at the time. But now I think we are out of it, because I was still very strong proponent of it. I was still saying that, you know, we should go back to negotiating table, try to cut as good a deal, the best deal we can cut, and we should sign it. We need to be in RCEP. But I've changed my mind. I think post Galwan, that game is over. You cannot trust the Chinese. I mean, when I say this, I think probably most of the India feels much more strongly than I do, because a lot of the Indians who didn't want RCEP anyway, even at that time when I was very much for it. But post Galwan, no, you see, because in China, the Communist Party makes all the decisions, and for them, trade and foreign policy and defense policy, they are all interconnected. So it's not, you can't assume that once we get into RCEP, someday the Communist Party will not come in to then also put its foot down on RCEP and try to then damage the other member countries. So I now argue that perhaps we have to distance ourselves from China in terms of trade, except that I prefer a more kind of smoother exit, and rather than do that by restricting imports from China, let us expand our imports from the other countries. And this is why I come on the side of having some sort of free trade agreements with the European Union, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and eventually United States. United States, I think geopolitically should be the first one, but economically, I don't think we have the possibility at this stage, because US is very competitive in agriculture, and India will not open its agricultural sector. It's just, we are not there. I mean, I think we can open and our farmers can actually compete, but I don't think politically will ever be in the near future. I just don't see that happen. So the US, I don't think will have to wait. But European Union agriculture, you know, the Europeans are not competitive in agriculture only. In fact, they will feel a threat from us rather than the other way around. There is also no issues of intellectual property or labor standards and so forth with the European Union. So we can actually successfully do one with them. United Kingdom is the same. That's what we should do. That's the path we should go on.
This was a very engaging discussion, and I wish we had more time to discuss issues with you, sir. Was a very fruitful discussion with you. I would request Jagmohan sir to propose a vote of thanks at this juncture.
You are muted, Sharma sir.
I'm so sorry. Professor Panagariya, we are thankful to you for the discourse that we have witnessed today. My pious task is to say thank you to you, but there is also a tradition of very rapidly recapitulating as to what all you have touched upon. Though we are already out of time, please permit me a minute to do that. We understand that you started with the Indian growth story in 80s and through 2000s, after which you talked about the response of Government of India in terms of fiscal and monetary measures, and then need for policy reforms at even state level. And you stressed that there is a compulsion for further demand stimulus, which might though widen the fiscal deficit. You have shared the concern about increase in the NPAs, the need for perhaps recapitalization of banks, and further for the privatization. There may be a case is what you have emphasized. But you have shown confidence that the economic recovery would happen, and it is contingent on the medical recovery. Soon as medical recovery happens, India would see economic recovery also, and perhaps so even globally. The furthering of the economy of the country, you touched upon the agriculture sector, where you talked about the limitation of the sector to increase the incomes and to reduce perhaps the workforce from present levels to about under 20%. After that, Professor, you have touched upon enterprise size, which perhaps is the highlight of the discussion, wherein you're talking about the scales and emphasizing that perhaps unless we achieve the scales, growth would not be coming, and it might get postponed. And certainly we are in a kind of hurry now, because we've been waiting for development for a long time to pick up with the growth. You have touched upon the underemployment status. You have talked about low urbanization rates that finally could add to the growth of the country. And then very low percentage of workforce in large firms with 200 plus workforce. Professor, you have finally talked about your belief in Shenzhen situation, the autonomous employment zone, similar zones becoming available to our own situation. Thank you, Professor, for taking so many questions and answering those questions with all patience. I believe for students of economics, you hold the status of a textbook. And the practicing economists, for them, you are a source of ideas and models and new thoughts in economics. And certainly, you are a celebrated economist. We take pride in you. And we became much more aware about you once you joined Government of India. Apart from the number of works that you have published prior to that, and you continue to do so. I really am thankful. And I express my gratitude on behalf of the Indian Institute of Management, and particularly, Professor, the Public Policy Center of the Institute, at which we are taking at present course in public policy. And you thankfully agreed to our invitation, and we are benefited by all this discussion. On my behalf and on behalf of all my colleagues and the Institute, I wish you all the best, Professor. And have a very good day. And
thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks.